I really think that not-for-profits need to be very careful and very mindful when they're using AI, that whatever the outcome is, whatever the experience, the ask, whatever it is that is sort of applied in real time to the donor or the prospective donor, that it's authentic, that it doesn't sort of come off as suspect by the donor. So I think that's easier said than done.
Brady Hambleton is the Vice President of Marketing, Engagement, and Analytics at Canada's Children's Hospital Foundations. He is a self-proclaimed data geek. And today we're going to dive into data analysis, data-driven technology, and Brady's wealth of experience in the intersection of nonprofit marketing, fundraising, and communications. Brady, thank you so much for being here.
Pleasure.
I wanted to first talk about the thing that everybody's been talking about for the last year, which is the COVID-19 crisis. How do you think the use of data-driven technologies has changed during the COVID-19 crisis?
Well, I certainly think that the need for data-driven technologies has accelerated. We've heard the phrase digital acceleration. I think used, probably overused. But I certainly think the pandemic and the need for business continuity for most organizations has underscored and highlighted the fact that if you're not using technology already, cloud technology, if you don't have the ability to pick up and go home and continue your work uninterrupted, then it's time to take a really close, hard look. So I think those are the table stakes on which most companies were hopefully positioned to be able to do that successfully. From there, I think companies that were kind of already dabbling or delving into AI and machine learning were presumably able to continue. I think in terms of the use of AI powered technologies, I think certain sectors, certainly in the health and the healthcare sector in particular, has likely accelerated the use of it so that they can understand and be able to effectively predict like what the trajectory of the next 6, 12, 18, 36 months looks like in terms of modeling and public health models. I think in other sectors, so not for profit in particular, if anything, we by and large may have had to hit the pause button on it because there's been so many other priorities. Speaking for my own organization, we were still very much in the midst of building kind of our ecosystem, laying the foundations and the groundwork for having a successful kind of data-driven enterprise. So that work has continued, but if we did have any plans to endeavor into things like AI, machine learning, kind of higher order technology, we've sort of had to put them on pause. We certainly still have aspirations. I think some not-for-profits are likely using it to drive better kind of donor modeling and predictive modeling to increase the rate of donations or the odds that they'll be able to get donations, which has also been a challenge for many not-for-profits, depending on the revenue models that they have, particularly organizations that have a very heavy dependency on community-facing events, and that's where their revenues. They may have a vested interest in using AI and sort of data-driven methodologies to find more donors or to find more donations or understand where they can drive higher conversions within their databases. But I think sort of by and large, the COVID-19 crisis has probably accelerated the digital transformation needs of organizations. And then I think AI and machine learning is what comes next once we're sort of out of the pandemic.
Yeah, and to talk more on that, what's a way that nonprofits can take advantage now that we're hopefully coming out of the pandemic, we're getting our vaccines, we're hopefully moving on. What is a way that nonprofits, like you said, that have had to put that on the back burner during the pandemic, what are some ways that they can integrate data-powered technologies into their organizations?
Well, I certainly think that as society comes out of the pandemic, obviously, and we start to return to what we're calling the new normal, or life as we
Mhm.
know it. Not-for-profits are inevitably going to have to start to think about, okay, what does this mean? Do we have opportunities to go back to the way things were, and just, golf tournaments and events and galas and balls?
Yeah.
Do we have to rethink and reimagine kind of the model entirely? And is it going to need to be some sort of hybrid model between having virtual events and being able to kind of maintain and sustain that in-person engagement that's so important? And I think regardless of all of that, most not-for-profits, like small, medium, and large, are sitting on a wealth of data. They
Mm.
have, for the most part, databases that contain sort of all of the pertinent information, like the necessary information to drive their business.
Yeah.
But by and large, they sort of go through the traditional RFM, so recency, frequency, monetary segmentation, to make determinations and calls on who gets what. So I think that sort of next layer of AI-driven or machine learning um, uh, techniques, for lack of a
Yeah.
better word, will be very important for those organizations to think about. And if they aren't already investing in them, and underscored by just how different things will be, I think, coming out of the other end of the pandemic in terms of expectations and donor behavior and kind of all of the things that contribute to the success of not-for-profits revenue models, they'll really want to think hard about those investments.
Yeah, I think that's really insightful. And one thing that I really like about the power of AI is that any fundraiser, if they take a data course, if they take the time to sit down with an Excel template or a sheet, they can come up with the predictions. But by the time they've come up with those predictions, their opportunity to talk to the donor that the prediction told them to talk to has already passed. So it's that these technologies will hopefully save nonprofit leaders time in getting to those predictions and time learning about how to do those techniques so that they can get back to the conversations that really matter.
Right.
What do you think is a key opportunity that AI presents to fundraising or to marketing going forward? Is there something that you saw recently that you said, that's really cool or really interesting?
Well, interestingly enough, we actually use an application, sort of an off-the-shelf application that a developer that provides sort of mobile applications for not-for-profits uses. We use it within our network of 13 children's hospital foundations to kind of equip them with all of the knowledge of all the locations that are in our network. So our model for CCHF is retail fundraising by and large. We have partnerships with Walmart, Costco, Lowe's, Marriott, Remax, a lot of large sort of Fortune 500 companies that have sort of a significant footprint in terms of like bricks and mortar location.
Yeah.
And so a big part of our model is having what we call the boots on the ground, the fundraisers within each of those 13 foundations, go out and engage at sort of the location level with the store leaders and the management, the staff. But that's a big blind spot for us because we can't, be in all places at all times, but we need that sort of feed of information. So the app itself gives them the opportunity to check in, to document, to sort of to take all the pertinent information, and it has a layer of AI built into it, which allows them to plan their day out and plan where their time would be best spent based on all of the kind of underlying engagement metrics that exist. So obviously, it's probably not 100% perfect, and it's reliant on kind of continual input, as most AI machine learning algorithms.
Yeah.
But it gives them the opportunity to say, okay, are there locations where I should be going and investing my time and energy that are different from where I was planning to go today? And so it's just a sort of a very kind of small working example of how like we're using AI in I think a very practical way. I think for not-for-profits at large, they need to really understand, because I think, and you've probably heard this before, like AI, machine learning, there's a lot of buzzwords that get thrown around.
Yes.
And I think there's sometimes a lack of understanding of what does that actually mean, and what will that actually do to contribute value to the organization. So first and foremost, I think the organizations need to understand the value and the purpose of it, And once they do, and they can decide, okay, we're going to use AI for the following 3 practical outcomes. And most not-for-profits should obviously be thinking about, how is it going to drive the bottom line? How is it going to result in more revenue? But the path to get there isn't always linear, the way that some people,
Yes.
it's not a silver bullet. Like there really are stages and gates in building out an effective AI and machine learning strategy. It starts with data, obviously, but
Yeah.
there needs to be a clear outcome and a purpose. Are you going to use it to try and determine a better segmentation approach to drive higher conversions through personalized messaging? Are you going to use it in your marketing communications to determine what kind of ads or ad copy gets served up to a particular individual? Are you going to use it to equip your fundraising teams, if you're a not-for-profit, with better sort of predictability on who will respond to a particular ask, or even an ask amount? So those are like the practical applications, but I think people kind of sometimes overlook that and think, ooh, AI, machine learning,
Yeah.
yeah, let's get into it. And then, once
Let's buy a
they're,
robot.
yeah, exactly. And then they're in too
I
deep
need something to
sometimes.
sweep the floors around here.
Exactly. And then, they get in too deep, and they've spent
Yeah.
a considerable amount of money and think, well,
Mhm.
this isn't necessarily like the outcome that I wanted. So just be very, very sure that you understand sort of what the determinants are in this, like having a good kind of AI or machine learning or whatever it is, what kind of model that you have. Make sure that you've got your data and your data house in order, and make sure you've got the right expertise. Even if you're getting an off-the-shelf product, make sure you understand what the purpose or the intended outcome of a particular sort of AI-driven product is, so that the end user knows kind of what they're doing and how they're using it. Because otherwise, people fail to understand, and typically the whole process fails.
And you touched on some challenges there with adopting AI. Do you think you could drive home any one particular challenge that you think gets in the way between nonprofit leaders, fundraisers, and AI?
Mhm. Um, a lack of strategy,
Mm,
I think, at the end of the day, and as I said before, a tendency to think of it as a silver bullet, like this is going to come in and this is going to solve all of my problems, because it certainly helps Amazon and Google and all those.
yeah.
We're not big massive technology companies. We are not for profits that have in many cases a really good wealth of information, really good rich data sets, but just understand how and where you need to use those data sets to drive your AI strategy. Don't
Yeah.
sort of jump all the way to the end and say, and therefore this is going to give us $1 million in extra revenue, without understanding the how, and in particular understanding what you need to do with your data and what kind of expertise you need, whether it's a third party or like a consultancy or an agency, or whether you've hired a data scientist in house. So it's not a linear path by any
Yeah.
means.
Yeah. I think one of the strategies that I've seen thought leaders talk about repeatedly is, what are your needs? What are the pain points within your organization? How can you solve those pain points? And what is the minimal viable product, I think they actually say, that you can use to solve those problems? And then
Right.
once you have successfully taken advantage of that, then what's the next thing you can do? Then you can start thinking about robots that'll sweep the floor for you, but just start slow. No
Correct.
one's saying that you have to download iWave right away, or although iWave's great, you don't have to do these things that will cost you thousands of dollars.
Right.
So one of my favorite things about the use of AI and other data-driven technology is that it saves you so much time. What should you do with all your free time? Now, you are in the marketing world, but you also touch on the fundraising world. Go anywhere with this. What is something that you should spend more time doing? Not necessarily you, but a fundraiser or a marketer. What should they spend more time doing?
Well, if AI is freeing it's freeing up all of the administrative time, and I'm just speaking theoretically, then
Yeah.
you should be out there having more conversations and
Yeah.
talking to your leads that your AI algorithm or your AI machine learning systems are telling you should talk to. And I think making sure in all cases given that our whole core business as fundraisers is in relationships
Yeah.
and building relationships. So AI will only take you so far. It will save you the time theoretically, in identifying who the people are that have the most meaningful connection or the most meaningful potential to give you opportunities to talk to and explore kind of fit and alignment with opportunities that you may have, whether it's $100, $100,000, $100 million. But I think at the end of the day, look at that free time, use it to kind of explore and qualify the leads or whatever it is that the AI strategy or system is giving you, and provide the feedback loop. So there's there's only so far that AI can take you, and then as
Hmm.
human beings, we have to sort of, unless it's like an unsupervised machine learning algorithm, but in terms of supervised learning,
Yeah.
somebody always needs to be giving it input to say, yes, that's right, no, that's wrong, no, this wasn't a great lead, so
Yeah.
that whoever is behind the scenes, whoever the data scientists or scientists are behind the scenes, understand and can continually tune the algorithms. I mean, that's just, I'm speaking sort of part technically and part practically on that.
What's a general best practice? You already touched on this a little bit, but what's a best practice for data management that you would give to any nonprofit professional?
Um, I'm going to say two things. One,
Sure.
just table stakes fundamentals, like have your data governance and your data hygiene practices buttoned down, and whether it's one dedicated person, whether it's a team, whether you're a small shop with kind of a jack of all trades, I can't sort of underscore enough the importance of like knowing kind of what's in your data systems, how is it structured, why
Yeah.
is it important for the business, and so that brings me to the second point, and that is if your data management strategy is simply to ensure like seamless ongoing operations. So for example, data is coming in that you're using to tax receipt and to initiate sort of onboarding or stewardship to a donor, great. Like just make sure that like the operations and the pipeline from when and how data is received, how it's loaded into your systems, how it's structured into the systems, and how it comes out the other end in reports, or how it's used to drive and generate relationship building, that's all sound. If on the other hand you are sort of starting to delve into AI and machine learning, understand as a fundraiser or as an administrator what some of the additional sort of underlying determinants are with your data and your data structures, because AI and machine learning require kind of constant streams of
Yeah.
data, or data that may be different from what you're currently collecting, or you may need to take the data and structure it differently. So I think making sure that you're clear on that, making sure that you've got the right resources, whether it's internal or whether you're outsourcing that work. And then if it requires additional data points or data fields, just ask yourself, are you ready yet? Are you in a ready state
Yeah.
yet? Or are you going to be force feeding um, uh, an algorithm or a system that is just going to tell you things you already know? In which case, like take a step back, recalibrate, understand what it is that you need to do with your data structures, or what additional data points you need to collect, how long ideally you should be collecting those data points, to give yourself sort of a table stakes basis for data modeling, and then proceed.
Yeah. So you're someone that seems to have a good mastery of data practices and a fairly good understanding of how to use AI within an organization. Where did you learn about this sort of stuff, and where can nonprofit leaders go to learn about this stuff too?
That's a really good question, and yeah, I'm fortunate to have some really great friends and former colleagues in my network
What
that
are their emails?
let me give them. Yeah. Um, one, obviously the app that I mentioned, it's a company called
Mm,
Powered By. Um,
mm,
they're a US based company. Jared Sheehan is the CEO there, and he's a sort of a data for good evangelist, and gives a lot of his time to share his own perspectives and his thought leadership. He's introduced me as well to sort of Microsoft, the sort of the AI for Good ecosystem, where there's a lot
Yeah.
of great kind of content and resources. And I think, honestly, by and large, as it sort of relates to the fundraising and not-for-profit community, this is still very new, kind of novel, somewhat uncharted territory. So I think, as with many of the other aspects of not-for-profit fundraising, whether it's the fundraisers, whether it's the corporate and community experts, the marketing experts, I think data and sort of the next frontier of using data and AI and machine learning to power better relationships and more meaningful fundraising practices is something that is going to continually emerge, and we're going
Yeah.
to see sort of it probably become ever present in AFP and in other areas where the focus by and large is fundraising practices. How do you get
Mhm.
more out of your annual giving? How do you get a better major gift relationship donor? But I think increasingly we're going to see data come into the conversation because it's not a nice to have anymore, it's a necessity, really.
Absolutely. Is there a particular time that you were impressed by the capabilities of AI or data-driven technologies? Maybe you took a step back and said, wow, this is really impressive.
That's the thing. I'm sure that there was, and I gave this question some thoughts in advance and tried to sort of rack my brain. I think, what's interesting is I would have to say, as a practitioner, as somebody who sort of works on a day-to-day basis within an ecosystem and has to make decisions on data governance and the tools that we use, going back to sort of the mobile app that we've sort of built and customized for our network of
Yeah.
foundations, the whole sort of plan my day feature and the underlying capabilities, that's really impressive to me because it's a practical daily application of AI. As a consumer and as an end user, and I've heard this from a couple of kind of leaders that I've met through like Gartner, and there's something called the CDO Exchange, this Chief
Mhm.
Data Officer Exchange. They've often said the best AI or machine learning applications are ones that the consumer has no knowledge whatsoever that
Yeah.
they're behind the scenes. And so I've probably been on the receiving end of some really impressive sort of technology driven outcomes as a consumer when I'm flying and I'm at the airport, for instance, or other places where if I stop and think about it, say, I wonder what was underneath that. It probably was a really good kind of AI algorithm or some sort of like machine learning application like in real time in the works, but it would be hard for me to actually know unless I knew somebody behind the scenes. So hard to answer, because I think if it's done well, you don't know about it. It's just
Yeah.
enhancing your experience, and then behind the scenes giving kind of the data practitioners tons of additional data points and knowledge.
Yeah. It's almost like there's almost two extremes to it where the beneficiaries of it, it's so seamless that they'll just think, well, it was built for this. So, how surprised then it can be. But the people that work on it, we've worked forever on this. So we can't be so surprised about this outcome. And there's kind of the same reaction from both sides. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Um, what's a key ethical consideration that nonprofit leaders should keep in mind when using data just in general?
That's a really good and a very important question
Yeah.
to ask ourselves and kind of the not-for-profit community at large. As with anything, and particularly not-for-profit organizations and charities, for the most part, obviously this can't be said for every single donor, because some donors are contributing because somebody they know is fundraising for a cause, or they've done so, they've chosen to donate this to a charity transactionally, or maybe it was in the moment. But that aside, say, like using the 80-20 rule, 80% of the donors and the contributors to any given charity or not-for-profit are doing so because they believe in the cause or the mission of
Yeah.
the organization. And as a result, it's a relationship built on trust.
Mm.
So I really think that not-for-profits need to be very careful and very mindful when they're using AI, that whatever the outcome is, whatever the experience, the ask, whatever it is that is sort of applied in real time to the donor or the prospective donor, that it's, you know, authentic, that it doesn't sort of come off as suspect by the donor. So I think I think that's easier said than done. So Amazon, for example, or Google, or any of the sort of the big tech companies have figured out a way to do it, and I think by and large people have caught on. Like I look at
Yeah.
a curtain, and then I see nothing but curtains across all of my
Yeah.
different, you know, channels that they have access to for the next, you know, 2 weeks. And that used to be, I think people used to sort of subconsciously tune that out, or it wasn't as apparent, whereas now I think it's apparent. So if charities and not-for-profits all of a sudden just started doing that, I think
Mhm.
it would probably be a bit disastrous. So I think that they from ethically, like, you're sitting on the data of somebody that has chosen to give to your organization to support your cause. It's a relationship that is built on trust in the organization, and that the organization will do good things with the money that they've received, and
Yeah.
that they'll honor the mission that they kind of used to compel you to give in the first place. So if all of a sudden you're out there, you know, cross-selling them and trying to um, you know position other opportunities that are driven by some sort of like technology, and not sort of having a human being look at it before it sort of deploys out, and it just becomes so inauthentic and so
Yeah.
similar to the experiences that they have as a consumer with a like a retailer, then yeah, of course, like I think that that's gonna sever the trust, that's gonna sever
Yeah.
the authenticity. So charities and not-for-profits actually have a very unique place with the consumer or the donor. um,
Extremely.
so, and it's also important to steward that well. And you've used the right word in ethics, like adhere to ethical practices.
Yeah, and I think, especially in your position, you want in some ways to think more like a business, think more like how to use data to drive revenue, but then you also need to stay true to a mission that is the foundation for who you are.
Absolutely.
And trying to, I think one thing that I've seen among organizations is that they've posted a data privacy policy on their website, or they have other policies that they make it clear this is what we're doing. You shouldn't expect anything else. It's a really good way to be transparent about how you're using data, and let your donors know that we're not going to do anything that wouldn't advance our mission, and we're not going to do anything to make you feel like you're being portrayed.
Absolutely. And I think those are table stakes nowadays. And just expectations that are like the baseline when somebody is entering into a relationship. And I think most
Yeah.
people probably don't think about it until it becomes a question, or they call it into.
Well, it's like what you were saying before, where it's AIs. You don't want to have to think of, as soon as you have to start thinking about what's going on behind the technology,
Yes.
then something might have gone wrong. Like it
Yeah.
it should be something that is almost self-explanatory.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And people's spidey senses will go up if they suspect
Yeah.
something
Yeah.
out of the ordinary or inauthentic. And it only takes, you know, something like that to sever the trust of somebody. So trust that's built over many years can be completely severed instantaneously from like a poor AI practice or an experience, which it's probably is never the intention of the organization. So just be very careful there. And I think what's a bit of a murky middle right now is organizations have to have kind of a transparent data policy and disclaimer on how they do and do not use a particular customer or donor's data.
Yeah.
But what does that mean for AI and machine learning? Because those are kind of new frontiers. Will there in time need to be explicitly stated policies that say, you know, we have machine learning algorithms that are continually attempting to make your experience better and taking additional data points? Like, where's the line, or where's the line going to need to shift as AI and
Yeah.
machine learning become kind of more ubiquitous in not-for-profit and fundraising? who knows?
especially with deep learning, because
Yeah.
we don't even know how deep learning comes to the insights that it does. It's analyzing so many different data points and drawing so many complex conclusions that the data privacy policy might look like we did our best and the machine is going to have insights. And that's been a problem in the health field before, where people in marginalized communities have been excluded from certain resources because they've been considered too high risk with deep learning. So I think that, the power of AI can't be ignored and should be taken advantage of, but such important considerations to think about.
Yeah, and I think ultimately, I think it's obvious to not-for-profit and charitable sector, but at large, like AI should always be used for good, like
Yeah.
and should never be, to your point, be used to further exclude people in marginalized communities that need services or better healthcare, better outcomes. If anything, it should be doing the opposite. It should be helping us understand how we can better help those communities. And kind of if you take that and apply that to charity and fundraising, where can not-for-profits and charities have the most impact or drive the most impact, and with who? So I think it's a bit of like it's a matchmaking, if you will.
Yeah. What can be adapted from the use of AI in the for-profit sector or the public sector to nonprofits?
Well, I think fundamentally, like the bottom line, because I tend to like to go there with fundraising, for profits and charities, is that they need to generate revenue that is meant to be used to either like it. There's a myriad of causes. I think like Canada has some like 87,000 plus charities, and I don't know what the official count of registered profits is, but they're all attempting to address some sort of societal issue. They're trying to subsidize and find sort of ways financially to support a need where the government or private sector sources or public sector dollars are not able to address the need, and yet the need is still kind of ever present, whether it's for animals or the environment or for healthcare, whatever it is.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, like really, if you really break it down, it's establishing relationships with individuals, with corporations, with foundations, with communities, making a case to say this is why kind of this particular issue, whether it's a healthcare issue, an environmental issue, an issue affecting animals, whatever it is important and worthy of your support. And here's our case, and will you give to us? The techniques that charities and not-for-profits have in their toolkit to go out and make those cases and find those peoples are pretty vast. There's all kinds of like verticals or channels that charities and not-for-profits use, but I think that they can sort of benefit from already like models that have already been developed or practices that have already been established, in some cases for many years, with AI and increasingly with machine learning. So I think at the end of the day, charities and not-for-profits shouldn't be sort of taking on AI and starting from scratch, if you know what I mean. They should be taking and applying and adhering to best practices. The question is whether that knowledge, the knowledge base of what are the best practices, if you've got a data set that looks like this, and you've got sort of AI technology or machine learning algorithms that are capable of taking your data set and turning it into a more profitable data set, for instance. So like how can like the for-profit companies and the AI machine learning practitioners sort of lift and land that from kind of the for-profit private sector into the not-for-profit sector without them having to spend tons of money, time, and human capital on establishing those models? Is there a way to benefit sort of the not-for-profit charitable sector at large with already existing knowledge? And I know that's sort of the pursuit of these AI for goods, and Microsoft in particular has like a really great program that sort of helps charities. But inevitably, I think the big fear for not-for-profits, and perhaps the barrier to entry, is just the cost associated with
Mm,
machine learning, or it's the fear of the cost.
yeah.
So how can these, great companies and uh, organizations and practitioners that have learned so much and that are benefiting on a daily basis from AI machine learning help the sector and sort of translate some of that knowledge so that the sector doesn't have to spend tons of money and human capital, I think, at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we go, I have three quick questions.
Sure.
One of them will be a surprise question, not too
Okay.
surprising, but what's the first metric that you look at when you get to your desk, or what's a metric that you think marketers or fundraisers should use more in order to understand how successful their initiatives are being?
Okay, so I'll break it down. The first
Yeah.
metric I look at is revenue, obviously, because our CEO, where I am, always says, like every day reminds us, we're here to raise money and deliver impact.
Yep. Yep.
So and that is the sort of the North Star of, should be the North Star of every not-for-profit charity that's raising money. Second to that, and perhaps something that I can't say like every fundraiser should be paying attention to it, but we're certainly trying to kind of look more carefully at it, is, and every model is different. So I'm looking at kind of underneath the revenue, like what's driving the revenue. So for us, like, we have an ecosystem of partners. It's pretty complex in how each of the partners generate revenue differently, and every charity will have a different, I call it the mix, like the revenue mix. So are you paying close enough attention to the mix as it is in real time, sort of like
Mm,
daily, year to date, against what you anticipate the mix to look like? And are you making sort of course corrections along the way? So I think it really depends on, I think it depends on the not-for-profit and the charity. So I don't want to
yeah.
say everyone should be looking at this and they don't look at this, because you could be looking at conversions, you could be looking at abandon rates, you could be, I think there's a myriad of
Mhm.
metrics that inform the effectiveness of your mix. And then if you drill down into the mix, the effectiveness of your channel strategies, and all of those metrics are very different. So that's my long-winded way of saying it really depends on the organization and the mix. For us, I do pay close attention, not just to the sort of the top line revenue, but how is the mix kind of
Mhm.
shaping up and evolving throughout the year against what we anticipate, and are there
Yeah.
opportunities throughout the year for us to be agile and kind of spring into action to say, wow, this is working really well in 3 months. What's it going to take to do that? Let's unite the necessary stakeholders and have that discussion and see if there's a possibility of us getting something kind of out there and scaled across all 13 markets in our network in the next 2
Yeah.
months. So I think those are sort of like the practical application uses of data. And I think like the second part of that is democratize your data and make sure
Mm,
that as many of your stakeholders as possible are seeing the data in the same way. It's telling the same story. Easier said than done. Business
yeah.
intelligence and good data visualization, storytelling is really hard,
Yeah.
because you effectively have to take, and it's like the university kind of tasks of read a 500-page book and write a 100-page essay kind of thing. It's like
Yeah.
it's a really a skill that organizations really need to think about investing in terms of what story does your data tell, and is everyone literally on the same page, like proverbially and literally speaking. So you got
And
two
look,
answers.
yeah, and look, don't say 100-page essay again. Okay, you're giving me flashbacks to sleepless nights. Um, what's a way that small nonprofits can engage companies better?
Wow, so great. Now, and let me just clarify, companies that could potentially be sources of revenue, or companies that could be sources of help, like in terms of like
Revenue.
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 Ooh, okay, what's a way that they can engage them better? Well, know
What do
who
you
you
think
are.
companies are looking for in a nonprofit partner is another way to look
Oh
at
my
that.
goodness, that's a great question and a loaded question. So I'll try my best to answer that succinctly. I think increasingly companies are looking for the opportunity to align themselves, and whether
Yeah.
it's their ESG, their CSR strategy, whatever it is. And I'm speaking sort of probably on behalf of large companies that
Hmm.
see themselves as needing to be corporate responsible citizens, essentially, because their customer
Yeah.
base and the demographics that our potential customers are looking at them with a discerning eye, saying, well, what are you doing for the good of society? And that's certainly the case in ours. So I think um, not-for-profits should understand sort of like at its core what the company's values are, whether the
Yeah.
company has some sort of ESG or social responsibility strategy, and whether their cause aligns with that. If it doesn't, I would say don't waste your time. Like
Yeah.
there may be a chance, but at the end of the day, if a company has decided, okay, environment is our core pillar, and you're a healthcare charity,
Yeah.
chances are it's not going to be a good use of your time or their time. But I think it's important for in both cases, like for the company to know who they are, who their core values are, and to be kind of clear, ideally, on what their corporate citizenship and responsibility framework looks like. And then for not-for-profits, small and large, particularly small, where you may have limited resources and limited time to go out, sort of understand where the opportunities are, focus in then, whether you're using open source databases, whether you're doing desktop research, whatever it may be, focus in on the companies that have an alignment, whether it's in their core values or in their strategy. And if you don't know what their core values are because it's not clear, perhaps, believe it or not, some of the biggest companies still don't have CSR ESG strategies, then ask them, like, and sort of maybe those are the questions that you ask before you actually go deeper with them and put a proposal in front of them. Is just, hey, just out of curiosity, is my, my cause, let's just say for example, I'm a healthcare charity, is the
Yeah.
health and well-being of children something that is core and fundamental to any of your strategies, or might you have an interest, whether it's to engage your employees and take pride and ownership over a cause
Yeah.
that your company commits to, or your customer base? And if the answer is, hadn't thought about that, but that's a possibility, then the door is open. If in another case they say, no, we've decided like unequivocally that we support higher education, thank you very much, and on to the next.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really insightful. I would also add geography is really big in that. If you're looking into partnering with a company that is in the next town over, it probably won't happen. Corporate sponsorship tends to be really driven by geography as well, from my experience.
Yeah, and I think that, like, I'm obviously speaking from my own experience in working with national, but you're absolutely right. If you're working
Yeah.
with a company that might have a regional footprint or even just a local footprint, then absolutely, like the geographic and sort of demographic relevance is probably important to them.
Last question. What's one way that small nonprofits can improve their marketing, with just like an easy tip that you would give to small nonprofits to take marketing a little bit more seriously?
Interesting. Small
I did
organization.
spring the question on you, so
No, that's a good question. I could draw on my own experience, I think. Um, you're probably never going to, unless it's a if you're a small not-for-profit and you're attempting to sort of cut through the noise and cut through the clutter of
yeah.
bigger organizations that have multi-million-dollar media budgets and can really pay to place themselves and pay
Hmm.
to play,
Hmm.
I would say know who you are, have your narrative and sort of your identity figured out. And that probably is the best place to invest your time early
Yeah.
on. Who are we? What's our story? And sort of how do we present ourselves? Because
Yeah.
increasingly we've seen that some of the most sort of remarkable brands that have endeared themselves to customers and consumers. Started with nothing, started on a shoestring budget, but they had an authentic story. They connected meaningfully and authentically with their customer base, or if you're a not-for-profit, with their donor base. And over time, they haven't had to necessarily spend millions of dollars positioning themselves and sort of trying to outshout their competitors.
Yeah.
They've created like a groundswell of support, and community along the way. And so start by understanding kind of who you are, your look, your feel. I break it down, I call it visual verbal identity.
Mm,
Start with who your core kind of customer base or your core target base is. And throughout the process, listen to what
yeah.
your supporters are saying. Take the time to listen, because listening and learning should be part of shaping your narrative and will
Yeah.
contribute to sort of that authentic groundswell that'll get you from 1,000 to 10,000 to 100,000 like followers and supporters.
Yeah.
And then you can start to be more strategic with making investments and kind of pursuing new frontiers in marketing and brand. So hopefully that's helpful.
I think it is very helpful. And I think this whole interview has been very helpful. Brady, thank you so much
My pleasure.
for joining me today. Is there anything you want to shout out or people watching should go check out?
So check out children'shospitals.ca. So we started not entirely from scratch. We sort of spun off from a very large organization, Children's Miracle Network Hospitals in the US. We still have great ties to them and a very great, meaningful relationship, collaborative relationship. But if anyone is curious to see what kind of happens when 13 kind of children's hospital foundations in Canada come together and say, we want to create a new organization and a new network in Canada. And we sort of built everything from scratch, including our identity, our brand, our experience. Always happy to connect, but check out children'shospitals.ca. Our story is there, our history is there. And I think it'll give you a good sense of how you can start with nothing and sort of build something that's meaningful.
Awesome. Brady, thank you so much. And thank you for watching.
My pleasure. Thank you, Jack.